Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight for our live Q&A with UI Hospitals and Clinics infectious disease specialist, Dr. Pat Winokur. It's been a really exciting and historic day at UI Healthcare. The first doses of the recently approved COVID-19 vaccine arrived at our hospital this morning, and vaccinations have begun for our employees. With all these new developments, we have some questions lined up for Dr. Winokur, and you might have some too. So please comment with any questions or concerns you have about the vaccine, and we'll answer as many of them as we can throughout our discussion. Just a note before we begin, this broadcast is for informational purposes only. So if you're feeling sick or concerned about your health at all, please contact your primary care provider. Thanks for joining us tonight, Dr. Winokur.
Thank you for having me. It's been a big day.
It has been. I want to start with this little bit of good news we've got. On Friday, the FDA approved the use of the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine for emergency use. And today, the UI healthcare employees, including you, received the vaccine. This is such good news after a year that's oftentimes felt bleak. How are you feeling about this?
You know, this is a time where you kind of reflect on all the hard work that a lot of people at the University of Iowa have put into careers, and those careers have led to things that have made this vaccine possible. University of Iowa has one of the premier researchers in Stan Perlman. He's been working on coronaviruses for 30, 40 years, and he's one of the world's experts. That's at the University of Iowa. And then we had the opportunity to do the clinical trial and take what he learned in the test tube and in the mouse into humans. It's pretty remarkable.
It's incredible. Sometimes it's hard to believe what we have here in Iowa, and what we were able to do by participating in the trial. It's just incredible. So we already noted that some of our frontline employees have received the vaccine today. Who will receive the vaccine after frontline healthcare providers, and when will they receive it?
Yeah, so remember that if you look at the United States population, frontline healthcare workers make up about 21 million people. And they've also prioritized those that are working and living in long-term care facilities. And it's going to take a little bit of time to have enough vaccine to vaccinate that first priority group, which is what we're working on now. Once that group has been vaccinated, the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, along with the state, will be deciding what the next groups are that will be vaccinated. It's likely going to be other essential workers, some of our food workers, firemen, other things that are critical to our infrastructure, and also high-risk patient populations. But we're kind of waiting to get through this first batch of healthcare workers to move on.
Yeah, and you already mentioned how some of our experts have played a role in this process, and we have some other experts that are helping make these kinds of decisions, right, with the Iowa Department of Public Health, and I believe some even with the FDA are helping decide how we roll out this vaccine, correct?
So we have three people from the University of Iowa healthcare system that are helping advise the state on priority populations that will come after the healthcare workers in long-term care facilities. We have individuals that are advising the FDA on safety and other things, but they're going to be stepping back a little bit now as the prioritization schemes come forward.
So do we have any idea when the average Iowan might have access to the vaccine?
So what they're saying right now is the likelihood is it's going to be late March to April before there's going to be enough vaccine where we can start to really distribute it in a more free fashion. Probably going to take through the summer to get as many people vaccinated as we really need to.
That's such a good silver lining to look towards. Maybe 2021 will be our year.
2021 is going to be a much better year. Okay.
So the FDA approving the use of this vaccine is one of the later steps in the process of developing a safe and effective vaccine. Can you explain to our audience what other steps this vaccine has had to go through to make sure it's safe for use?
Yeah, so a lot of people are worried about that. I think the concept of Operation Warp Speed, as I said, has been a good thing and a bad thing. I think the fact that we have moved things forward quickly is a good thing, but it has created some concern in people's minds. But I want people to know a lot of the slow onset of getting vaccines into the population is we don't know the science behind these organisms. What really is causing the best immune response that protects someone? Well, we were really lucky because in 2002 and 2012, there were two other coronaviruses. One was SARS, and the other was the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome virus. And we learned a lot of science at that time. And that really jump-started our understanding of how to create a vaccine for this particular coronavirus outbreak. So that was very lucky. And they had already done a lot of animal testing for vaccines for those two other coronaviruses. And FDA was able to use some of that knowledge from previous work to help push these animal studies through faster. But remember, we still did animal studies. We still did those really intense early human studies where we watched everything. We did electrocardiograms. We did all sorts of blood studies, chemistries, liver function tests, everything to see whether there were any side effects in this vaccine. And it passed with flying colors. And then got into these larger studies of 30,000 and 40,000 people. So really, the speed is a lot of the good luck and hard work that people have put in developing previous vaccines. And then we did have some administrative hurdles that we jumped a little bit faster. That was good. And in the background, while we were starting to study the vaccine in humans, the companies have been creating this vaccine, creating all those vials that you're seeing on the FedEx planes and UPS trucks. They were taking the risk that if these studies didn't work, they were not going to be able to sell that vaccine or have any financial benefit. Now, the US government helped because they put a lot of money into that manufacturing too, but that still really helped us get to this point much faster.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on it a little bit. We also had in all hands on deck. That's partially why it had the momentum that it did, because we're in a global pandemic and a lot of people worked on this, right? So that also contributed to the speed.
There have been a lot of long days and busy weeks by a lot of people.
And we're so grateful for everybody who did those long hours and contributed in some way. We're talking a lot about the Pfizer BioNTech, and tell me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Is that correct?
I call it BioNTech, but
okay, BioNTech. We're going to say it that way. The Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine that's been approved by the FDA. But there are some other COVID-19 vaccines in development too. Could you give us a status update on some of those other ones that are in the works?
So Mrna, which is another messenger RNA vaccine, is being reviewed by the FDA this week. And it is expected, based on the data that we've seen, and it's preliminary data, that this vaccine also will be approved. And it's very possible that we could have doses of Mrna vaccine available next week to really help jumpstart the vaccination process even further.
That's great. And so that would, and the Mrna one and the Pfizer one are relatively similar, correct? They both have similar effective or efficacy rates?
They're both about 95% effective, which is outstanding. And they both have very similar mechanisms of action. How they work is very similar. So we think that one's going to get approved. There are other vaccines that are in production or in trials, not production. They're in production behind the scenes. And the ones that are in the lead right now are still the AstraZeneca and Janssen vaccines, which are adenovirus-based vaccines, but other companies are getting studies started. The University of Iowa is going to be participating in another clinical trial of a Novavax product, and this is going to be a much more traditional vaccine, purified protein with an adjuvant, very similar to some of the hepatitis B vaccines, flu vaccines that we have approved in the United States. So stay tuned. There's more to come.
Very interesting. It's very cool to see how science is working right now. While we're waiting for the vaccine to be available to more and more people, what are the most important things that Iowans can continue to do to keep themselves, their families, and their community safe?
So this is the sad part about this vaccine is we don't have enough of it right now, and not everybody can get it who wants it. We're going to have to continue to be very careful with social distancing, masks, hand washing for quite some time. No vaccine is perfect. So we know that 5% of people that were in the Pfizer trial did still get coronavirus. Also, we don't quite know yet whether this vaccine will prevent spread from person to person, even in those who have been vaccinated, something we're hoping to learn with further research. So people still have to be pretty careful until we can get the vast majority of people vaccinated.
Absolutely. So if you're just joining us, we're here with the UI Hospitals and Clinics infectious disease specialist, Dr. Pat Winokur, discussing the recently approved COVID-19 vaccine. Dr. Winokur, let's answer some of those questions that are coming in from Facebook. So Jake asks, is there any reason that someone with a pre-existing condition like cancer should avoid getting the vaccine?
So I can tell you that we did not study people like that, but remember, when you think about a vaccine, you're thinking about safety and you're thinking about efficacy. There's nothing that I can think of in the science of the vaccines that would make it less safe in someone who has had cancer and is maybe a little immunosuppressed. We can't say that the vaccine will be quite as perfect as it has been in healthy individuals. That's something that we'll learn. We do know that the Pfizer vaccine was really effective, though, even in people who have chronic medical conditions and in those that were even 75 years of age and older. So that's a really good sign that this is a very effective vaccine. And I still think even if you have cancer, that you may mount a really good immune response.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Patty asks, when will high-risk people get the vaccine? And is the vaccine any less safe for those who are at high risk? So it's a similar question as the previous one.
Yeah, so I can't say exactly when we're going to be moving to the next phase of individuals, but I think high-risk people will be in that next phase along with probably community essential workers. And I think the vaccine is going to be safe. As I said, we studied people in the Pfizer trial that had chronic medical conditions that were high risk for severe COVID infections. The vaccine was still like 93% effective in these individuals. That's fantastic. So I think we've got really good safety data, and we'll be rolling it out as soon as we can get enough delivered to offer it.
Wonderful. Suzanne asks, when do we anticipate a vaccine for kids?
That one's a little bit slower. And I think the Pfizer vaccine is approved for kids that are 16 and 8 to 18. So we have one small population that it's approved for. They have studies ongoing right now for the 12 to 15-year-olds. They're about 40-50% enrolled in those studies. So hopefully we'll start to get some data from the 12 to 15-year-olds soonish. Then they need to gear up for new trials in the younger kids, and they are already planning those trials, and they're planning trials for pregnant women.
Great, that's good to know. Christina asks, will the shot prevent infection and transmission or only symptoms?
So this is something that we don't know the answer to just yet. We know that it prevents symptomatic COVID-19. What we need to learn with some further studies is whether it reduces the amount of virus that you shed after you've gotten the vaccine, because that would be the indicator that you could kind of squelch transmission from person to person. So we don't know that yet. In other organisms, other viruses, usually the vaccines do improve viral shedding and it reduces spread. Sometimes it isn't perfect, but it reduces spread. So that's what I'm hoping for with the coronavirus vaccines.
One commenter mentioned the high percentage of people who survive COVID-19. What are the reasons to get the vaccine if statistically it's unlikely to kill you?
So I think you need to be a little bit broader in your thinking. So death is certainly the worst outcome we have, but there are a lot of people that are critically ill that do eventually survive, but they have long and rocky hospitalizations. There are a lot of people, even some who are relatively insignificantly ill, that are showing chronic conditions that are showing up. They may have asthma-like lung disease. There's certainly this symptom of kind of the COVID fog that people talk about, a little bit of just your thinking isn't quite as good as it used to be. So I think there are a lot of other things to think about. And also remember, the hospitals are overwhelmed. So we are able to keep a lot of people alive, and we're thankful for that. But the intensive care units, the clinics are very, very busy. And this is reducing the time that we have to give to people that have regular medical conditions. So I think you have to think a little bit more broadly than just thinking about preventing death.
Yeah, it's similar to how I feel a lot of people feel about the flu, which is you don't want to get the flu. If you've ever had it, you don't want it. You might not die from it, but it's not very much fun, and you might end up in the hospital, or you could give it to someone who you love who could get really sick. And that's how I try to describe it to people I know who say stuff like that to me. Well, but I won't die from COVID-19. And it's like you said, you got to think a little bit broader, that there's more to it than just that worst case outcome, similar to the flu.
Yeah, I agree.
Several people are wondering if you can share what exactly is in the vaccine.
So the vaccine is actually quite different than traditional vaccines because it's made using chemistry. So they take little nucleotides and they string them together. And so the vaccines really don't have cell parts. They have these little chemicals in them. There are no preservatives. The bottles are not, there's no latex in the bottles. So these are pretty pure vaccines.
That's very cool to think about how we're able to create a vaccine like that. And while we're on the topic of it, can you explain a little bit about what an mRNA vaccine is and how it works?
So this is a vaccine that it uses a code that your cell, once it gets into your cell, recognizes as signaling how to make a protein. And so it goes into your cell uses all its production machinery to make that protein, and then it sticks it on the surface of the cell so that the immune system can recognize it and create antibodies to that protein. And remember, this vaccine does not have any ability to cause COVID-19. There is no active virus in it. It makes one protein, that's the spike protein. But it's a really important protein, and we're happy that we're making antibodies to it because those are the ones that prevent the infection from taking hold in the body.
Yeah, so it basically enables our body to create little imitators that our immune system kind of takes as like, oh, that looks like the COVID-19 virus, so we're gonna we're going to create an immune response. That's very cool. Very cool. Sarah from Facebook asks, are people who have had COVID-19 recommended to still get the vaccine? And if so, will those people experience any different kind of side effects, or do we know?
So we do know that we had people in the trial that had COVID-19. We didn't know it at the time, but we test antibody titers on the day before they get the vaccine. And they did not have any untoward effects getting the vaccine. It is recommended that if you had COVID-19 and it was 90 days or more in the past, that you do go ahead and get the COVID-19 vaccine. And so far, we don't think there's any risk to that. And we do know that the studies are showing that the vaccine actually improves the antibody response compared to natural infection. In some of the younger people, the 18 to 64-year-olds, the antibody titers were about 3 or 4 times higher than those seen in people who had recovered from COVID-19.
Well, so some people have actually, I've seen it on the internet, I've heard it from, people I know are convinced that getting the virus will produce the same kind of immunity or same kind of response as getting the vaccine. So are you saying that maybe there is a difference there?
It actually may be better. So the vaccine may give you better protection than the natural infection. So
that's encouraging.
We were really amazed to see that in the studies. It's great.
And speaking of side effects, since we're on the topic, what kind of side effects are we seeing from the vaccine?
So this vaccine has side effects that we see with a lot of vaccines. Sore arm, feel a little achy, headache, fatigue, what we call kind of a flu-like feeling. And that flu-like feeling is actually a good sign because it means your immune system is revving up to make antibodies to that vaccine. Usually those symptoms last for 24 to 48 hours, and then they go away. The people in our trial described the turning off to be really abrupt. They would say just boom, the symptoms ended. And they felt great after those symptoms ended. So we expect that. Back pain was one of the things that was, I think, a symptom of, if you remember, the back has a lot of muscles that keep it up, and it's just part of that muscle achy thing that you get with flu. So that was one of the things that was a little surprising that we saw. But again, went away.
All right. Well, those sound like manageable side effects for the most part. Kelly wants to know, what does the follow-up look like for people who get the vaccine? Will their reactions be tracked at all?
So this is an important part of the United States system of watching for side effects from vaccines. We have very aggressive reporting systems for vaccine adverse events. That system has clicked into place, and we will be reporting any side effects or symptoms that are unexpected to the CDC throughout the country as this vaccine is rolled out. There are also some special systems that are being set up for the healthcare workers through various studies to really track things even more intentionally. Instead of waiting for someone to report, they're soliciting those side effects from the people who've gotten vaccines. So I think we have some really good opportunities to continue to learn as we get this out into the U.S. population.
That's encouraging as well to know that the making sure that it's safe and it's effective doesn't stop now that it's approved. We continue to track those things.
And that's something that we do with all vaccines, even ones that have been approved for 20 years. So that's something that's very important, and we always are learning.
Absolutely. Kelly and Amanda on Facebook have questions about people who have already had a transplant or those who are waiting to have a transplant. Is it safe for those people to get a vaccine? Is there any idea what priority group transplant recipients might fall into?
So we don't have any data on transplant recipients. Certainly those that are awaiting transplant, absolutely. This is an opportunity to try and get your immune system boosted. Once you've had the transplant, this gets into the same scenario as having someone who's on chemotherapy. Your immune system is suppressed, and we could potentially expect that the vaccine might not be as potent in someone who's had a transplant, but we think it's safe. This is not a live vaccine, and that is the one type of vaccine that we're very careful with transplant patients. This is a killed vaccine, so to speak. So we will be learning more, and there, I'm sure, will be special studies, but I think that the recommendation is going to be for those individuals to get this vaccine.
That's very interesting and good to know. Carolyn asks, how long does it take for the vaccine to become effective after it's injected?
So the first dose looks like it's about 50% effective at preventing you from getting COVID-19. And that starts to happen around day 10 to 14. That's when your antibodies start to rev up. That second dose, though, really solidifies the antibody response, and that's when you started to get the efficacy of 95%. So you get some protection after the first, but don't let your guard down too quick. Wait, get that second dose, and then really it kicks in about a week after that second dose.
Great. And I know we already touched on the vaccine in kids, but someone on Facebook is asking about why isn't it available for kids yet? Is it, like you said earlier, is it just because we haven't tested it enough in kids?
So this is the way we test all drugs, is we start with healthy humans. That's a phase 1, and then we move into a more generalized population, which is the phase 3. We start with adults to make sure it's safe, and then we start working our way backwards using older kids, moving down to younger kids. And it's simply a way of trying to protect the children as we're starting to learn more about these new vaccines or drugs.
Thank you for explaining that piece. Shauna asks, what does the research say about the vaccine for those who have severe allergies?
So that's a really good question. And this was something that most people know, that in the United Kingdom, there were 2 individuals that had what's called an anaphylactic reaction to vaccine. Now, both of those individuals had strong histories of anaphylactic reactions. What the US has recommended is if you have had an anaphylactic reaction, which is acute shortness of breath, swelling of your face, swelling of your tongue, after a vaccine, then you should not take this vaccine until we know more. Regular allergic reactions, which are so common in the population now, food allergies, other things like that, they are not a contraindication to getting the vaccine.
Great. What does the data say about how effective the COVID-19 vaccine is, and how does that compare to other vaccines like the flu shot, for instance?
So the Pfizer and Mrna vaccines that we've seen the data on are about 95% effective. That means for 100 people that have gotten this vaccine, 95 of them have been really fully protected for the next 3-4 months. That is a remarkable efficacy rate. This is as good as we see with almost any vaccine. Measles, hepatitis B, these are great vaccines. Compare that to influenza or the flu vaccine. At best, the flu vaccine is about 70% effective. And in some years, when the strain doesn't quite match the vaccine, it can go down to 40 or 50%. Yet, even those less good flu vaccines can really improve side effects and severe illness. in our most vulnerable people. So they still work, but this one is out of the ballpark. They knocked it out.
It really is incredible. I mean, I get my flu shot every year, and if it's not as effective as we hope it would be, I'm still glad to have gotten it for the protection it provides. So to hear that this is 95% effective, it's incredible.
It was much better than any of us had hoped. So we knew that FDA said that they would approve it if it was 50% effective or better. I don't think any of us, after hearing that, expected 95%. There was something that, I don't know, after FDA said that number, we were all expecting lower, but it's great to see.
It had to have been such a good feeling, as we've touched on already, after the rough year we've had, to know that not only did the research lead to an effective vaccine, but such an effective vaccine.
So the fact that it is so effective is going to help a lot. It means that we're going to be able to start seeing effects on hospitalizations and death rates even faster. And that's so rewarding.
Absolutely. Tammy asks, will UI hospitals and clinics contact patients who should get the vaccine, or should the patient contact their provider and ask?
So when we have vaccine available, we will be working with the providers, and that we're going to be sharing other communications so that people should be looking out for it. But you can always ask your provider if they have it available. And very vulnerable people, they probably will be reaching out.
Great. Now that we have a light at the end of the tunnel, when do you suspect life might go back to normal if the majority of the population receives the vaccine?
So the estimates are that just because the slow pace of getting enough people vaccinated, and really what we want to get is at least 70% of people in the US vaccinated to really squelch this pandemic, that's probably going to take until next fall for us to get that population vaccinated and to start to see the effects.
Great. And I know you've already said that the study for the Pfizer vaccine really incorporated a lot of different kinds of people with different underlying conditions and different ages. We have a lot of people asking about autoimmune diseases. Do we know how they may or may not be affected by this vaccine, or whether they should get it?
So we were allowed to enroll people that have autoimmune diseases that are not treated with really aggressive immunosuppressants. And we saw no side effects in those individuals. This is, again, I think, getting to the question of safety versus efficacy. I think the vaccine will be safe in those individuals, but if they're on some of those really powerful immunosuppressing medications, some of the TNF-alpha inhibitors, they may not respond quite as robustly to the vaccine. I still think it's going to be a really good response. So we will be probably seeing CDC recommending it for that type of population.
Great. And thank you for explaining that in such an easy to understand kind of way, because I was wondering about that too, why it might not work as effectively. So you explained that really, really well. Thank you. Dennis asks, will this vaccine need to be taken yearly, or is it just the initial 2 shots that will be needed?
So that's something we don't know yet. The early results are great, but we will be in the clinical trial. We are going to continue to follow people and watch what happens over time. We'll be following blood titers, and we'll be watching to see whether they start to acquire COVID-19 later after they've received the vaccine. So that's something that we can't answer today. We know that with other coronaviruses, more the common cold coronaviruses, the immune response doesn't last forever. So it's very possible we may need booster doses at some period of time.
Great. And I want to go back to the fact that you were among some of the frontline employees that we have that received the vaccine today. And I know we had talked in previous discussions that you said, of course, I will get it when it's available. I just wanted to see if you had any encouragement for our audience about why they should receive the vaccine when it's available to them, or if people have reservations. Do you have any advice or encouragement?
Well, I can tell you my arm is fine today. It's not sore. I'm feeling great. I have no fevers, chills, or anything. And remember, the people, though those symptoms were common, the grading was mild to moderate, and that's really important. Only 9% of people had side effects that really, they said, disrupted their daily activities. So if I get some fatigue tomorrow, that's fine, but I don't expect it to be a big problem. And so I trust this vaccine. I've seen the data, I've watched individuals in the clinical trials, and I'm comfortable with it. I think that's an important thing for the audience to know. I'm willing to put myself into the vaccine recipient pool. So
great. Thank you for sharing that. And I was just curious too. I'm sure there is some sort of side effect after the second injection, but after your second dose, do we see similar side effects? Can people expect that?
So the studies show that the second dose is a little bit more of a wallop than the first. You'll have a little bit more symptomatology, the sore arm, the fatigue. So you can expect that. And that's something that we've seen with many other vaccines. The shingles vaccine is the most recent one that we've seen a fair amount of what I call reactogenicity, that flu-like feeling. And the second dose for that vaccine is a little bit stiffer than the first. So I expect that. Tylenol, ibuprofen work really well. And if you have a severe reaction, let your provider know.
Great. And can you remind us again about how many people were actually involved in the Pfizer study?
So there were 44,000 people enrolled. Wow. 35,000 of them were enrolled in the United States, and then the remainder were in 4 other countries. Half of them got placebo, half got active vaccine. So this is a remarkably big study. Mrna, which is the second vaccine that'll probably be approved this week, they enrolled 30,000 people. So we have a lot of safety data. And the other thing people need to know is that when we are seeing really unusual serious side effects from vaccines, they almost always occur within the first 6 weeks after a vaccine. This vaccine was not approved until people had finished 2 months after the second dose. So we have a lot of safety data, and we have covered that time point that is most critical in understanding if a vaccine is safe.
Great. Speaking of the participants of the trial, Mrna asks, will the people who were enrolled in the trial be told if they should get the vaccine, the placebo group, I should say?
So we just learned that today. It's the question of the hour, since we do have a lot of healthcare workers that decided that they were willing to volunteer. And Pfizer is going to unblind the study in coordination with when the states and the CDC recommend that that group get vaccinated. So healthcare workers will be unblinded first, followed by those in higher risk conditions. And so we are in the process of getting all of the paperwork together, and we'll start unblinding them promptly.
It's very exciting. Well, I just wanted to give you a chance to leave our audience with anything about the vaccine, because we're almost out of time.
So I want everybody to be excited that we have some light at the end of the tunnel, but don't jump ahead too quickly. We do still need to wear masks, wash our hands, socially distance. It's really important over the holidays that are coming up. I know people are very tired of hearing this same litany of recommendations, but we need to keep doing it. People are still at risk, and not very many people are getting vaccine in December. So it's still really important. But this is history. Your kids will be reading about this. Your kids will be reading about this. This is a historic moment.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have been talking about this is going to be the thing that we tell our kids when they're older, our grandkids, like, I remember 2020. I remember when the vaccine was created. It's a bright spot in this year, that's for sure.
It is. The end is coming.
Yes. As my daughter said, the virus is almost over. That's what my 3-year-old celebrated today. Thank you so much for joining us again, Dr. Winokur, and providing your expertise on this subject. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a great day.
Thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight. If you began watching after we started talking with Dr. Winokur, please go back to the beginning so you can hear all of the great information and all the questions she answered for the audience. And stay tuned to our social media channels and our website, uiht.org, for all the latest COVID-19 and vaccine information as we have it. And lastly, remember to try to find the good in every day, especially days like today, as we continue living through the pandemic, and keep wearing your mask, washing your hands, and taking care of your physical and mental health. Thank you for watching.